Rebecca Williams woke up every morning at 6:30 sharp. She would make coffee in the small kitchen of their house on Maple Street. The house was nice but not fancy. It had 3 bedrooms and a small backyard. Rebecca had painted the walls, herself in soft colors. Everything looked clean and perfect. Her husband David would come downstairs at 7. He always wore his work clothes. David worked in construction. He built houses and fixed buildings. His hands were rough from all the hard work. He had been doing this job for 15 years. David made about $60,000 every year. It was enough money for them to live okay, but not enough to be rich. Rebecca would kiss David goodbye every morning. She would pack his lunch in a blue cooler. Usually she made sandwiches and put in some fruit. David always said thank you and told her she was the best wife in the world. Then he would drive away in his old pickup truck. After David left, Rebecca would get ready for her job. She worked at a small clothing store called Bella's Boutique. It was in the downtown area. Rebecca only worked 3 days a week. The store sold nice clothes, but nothing too expensive. Most of the customers were regular women from the neighborhood. Rebecca had been married to David for 8 years. They met when she was 22 years old. She was working at a coffee shop then. David would come in every morning before work. He always ordered the same thing: black coffee and a blueberry muffin. One day he asked her out. They dated for 2 years before getting married. Everyone said they were a perfect couple. Rebecca was pretty with long brown hair and blue eyes. She always dressed nicely and smiled a lot. David was tall and strong. He had kind eyes and always helped people when they needed something. Their neighbors liked them both very much. On Sundays, Rebecca and David went to church together. They sat in the 3rd row on the left side. After church, they would go to lunch at a small restaurant called Mary's Diner. Rebecca always ordered a salad. David always got the burger and fries. They would talk about their week and make plans for the next one. Rebecca kept their house very clean. Everything had a place. The dishes were always washed. The bed was always made. She liked things to look perfect. When people came to visit, they always said how nice everything looked. Rebecca felt proud when people said these things. But inside, Rebecca was not happy. She looked at their house and saw all the things that were old or cheap. The couch was from a furniture store that sold used things. The TV was small and old. The car she drove was 10 years old and made strange noises. Rebecca wanted nicer things. She would look at magazines that showed beautiful houses. The kitchens had marble counters. The living rooms had expensive furniture. The bedrooms had big beds with silk sheets. Rebecca would dream about living in houses like that. She would imagine wearing expensive clothes and jewelry. When Rebecca went to work at the boutique, she would see women who had money. They would buy clothes without looking at the price tags. They carried expensive purses. They wore real diamond rings. Their cars were new and shiny. Rebecca wanted to be like them. Sometimes Rebecca would go online and look at luxury websites. She would look at designer dresses that cost more than David made in a month. She would look at jewelry that sparkled like stars. She would look at cars that cost more than their house. She wanted all of these things so badly it made her chest feel tight. David did not understand why Rebecca seemed sad sometimes. When he asked her what was wrong, she would say nothing. She would smile and kiss him. But the sadness was always there. Rebecca felt trapped in their small life. David tried to make Rebecca happy. Sometimes he would bring her flowers from the grocery store. They were not expensive flowers, but he thought they were pretty. Rebecca would say thank you, but the flowers reminded her that they could not afford the beautiful flower arrangements she saw in fancy magazines. On their anniversary, David took Rebecca to a nice restaurant. He had saved money for 2 months to pay for dinner there. He was so excited to surprise her. Rebecca smiled and said it was wonderful. But she noticed that other women in the restaurant had jewelry that cost more than David spent on their whole dinner. Rebecca started to feel angry about her life. She was 28 years old and felt like she was wasting her best years. She wanted to travel to Paris and Italy. She wanted to wear designer clothes. She wanted to drive a car that did not make strange noises. She wanted to live in a house that looked like the ones in magazines. David was happy with their life. He loved Rebecca and thought they had everything they needed. He did not understand why someone would want more than a nice house, good food, and someone who loved them. David often said they were lucky to have each other and a safe place to live. But Rebecca did not feel lucky. She felt jealous of other women. She felt angry that she had to work at a small boutique instead of shopping at expensive stores. She felt frustrated that David was satisfied with so little. She wanted more than David could ever give her. At night, Rebecca would lie in bed next to David while he slept. She would think about different lives she could have. She would imagine being rich and powerful. She would imagine wearing beautiful clothes and living in a mansion. These dreams felt more real than her actual life. Rebecca began to think that she had married too young. She wondered what would have happened if she had waited. Maybe she could have met someone with more money, someone who could give her the life she really wanted, someone who understood that she deserved better than a small house on Maple Street. This was how Rebecca Williams felt in the months before her life changed forever. She looked perfect on the outside, but inside, she was planning something that would shock everyone who knew her. The woman who seemed so happy and grateful was actually angry and desperate for a different life. 3 months after Rebecca started feeling trapped in her life, something happened that would change everything. The owner of Bella's boutique told Rebecca she had found her a better job. It was at a fancy jewelry store called Diamond Dreams, in the expensive part of downtown. Rebecca was excited about the new job. The jewelry store was nothing like the small boutique. Everything was shiny and expensive. The floors were made of white marble. The walls had mirrors with gold frames. The jewelry cases were filled with diamonds and gold that sparkled under bright lights. On her first day, Rebecca wore her best dress. It was a simple black dress she had bought on sale 2 years ago. She felt nervous as she walked into the store. The manager was a woman named Patricia, who wore a suit that probably cost more than Rebecca made in a month. Patricia showed Rebecca around the store. She explained that their customers were very wealthy people. Some pieces of jewelry cost more than most people made in a year. Rebecca tried to act normal, but inside she was amazed. She had never seen so much expensive jewelry in one place. The other women who worked at the store were different from Rebecca. They wore designer clothes and expensive shoes. They talked about restaurants Rebecca had never heard of. They carried purses that cost thousands of dollars. Rebecca felt like she did not belong, but she was determined to fit in. On her 3rd day at work, Rebecca met Michael Thompson. He walked into the store like he owned it. He was tall with gray hair and wore a suit that looked like it was made just for him. His watch was gold and probably cost more than Rebecca's car. When he spoke, his voice was deep and confident. Michael was looking for a gift for his mother's birthday. He wanted something special and expensive. Rebecca helped him look at different pieces. She was nervous because she did not want to say something wrong. But Michael was kind and patient. He made jokes that made her laugh. Michael chose a diamond necklace that cost $15,000. He paid for it with a credit card like it was nothing. Most people would have to save for years to buy something like that. But for Michael, it was just a normal purchase. Before Michael left the store, he asked Rebecca her name. When she told him, he smiled and said it was a beautiful name. He said he hoped to see her again soon. Rebecca felt her heart beat faster. She had never met a man like Michael before. Rebecca went home that night and could not stop thinking about Michael. She looked him up online and discovered he was even richer than she had thought. Michael owned a company that built expensive houses and buildings. He was worth about $12 million. He owned houses in 3 different states. He drove cars that cost more than most people's houses. Michael came back to the store the next week. He said he wanted to buy a gift for his sister. But Rebecca noticed he spent more time talking to her than looking at jewelry. He asked about her life and seemed interested in what she said. He was charming and made her feel special. This became a pattern. Michael would come to the store every week or 2. Sometimes he bought something. Sometimes he just looked around and talked to Rebecca. She learned that he was 45 years old and had been divorced for 3 years. He had no children. He traveled all over the world for business. Michael told Rebecca stories about his life that seemed like fairy tales to her. He talked about eating dinner in Paris and flying in private jets. He owned a boat that he kept in Florida. He had been to countries Rebecca could not even pronounce. His life sounded like something from a movie. After 2 months of these visits, Michael asked Rebecca if she would like to have coffee with him after work. Rebecca knew she should say no because she was married, but she was so curious about his world that she said yes. They met at an expensive cafe that Rebecca had walked past many times but never entered. The coffee cost $8, which was more than Rebecca usually spent on lunch. Michael ordered without looking at the prices. He told her more stories about his business and travels. Rebecca told Michael about her life but left out some parts. She told him she lived in a nice house but did not mention how small it was. She told him she was married, but made it sound like she was not very happy. Michael listened carefully and seemed to understand that she wanted more from life. Michael was everything David was not. Where David was simple and honest, Michael was sophisticated and worldly. Where David worked with his hands, Michael made money with his mind. Where David was satisfied with a quiet life, Michael lived an exciting life full of adventure. After their coffee date, Michael started calling Rebecca. At first, the calls were short and friendly. He would ask about her day or tell her about a trip he was planning. Rebecca looked forward to these calls more than anything else in her day. Rebecca began to lie to David about where she was and what she was doing. When Michael called, she would go outside or into another room. When David asked who was on the phone, she would say it was a friend from work. These small lies came easily to her. Michael started giving Rebecca small gifts. First, it was flowers that he had delivered to the jewelry store. Then it was a silk scarf that cost more than Rebecca made in a week. Each gift made Rebecca feel special and important. Rebecca found herself comparing Michael to David all the time. When David came home dirty from work, she thought about Michael in his expensive suits. When David wanted to watch TV, she thought about Michael's stories of fancy parties. When David fell asleep early, she thought about Michael's exciting life. One day, Michael told Rebecca he was looking for someone special to share his life with. He said he wanted a woman who was intelligent and beautiful. Someone who could appreciate the finer things in life. Someone who deserved to be treated like a queen. Rebecca knew Michael was talking about her. She also knew that her life with David was standing in the way of everything she had ever wanted. For the first time, Rebecca began to think about what her life would be like without David in it. The thought scared her but also excited her more than anything ever had. Rebecca's relationship with Michael changed everything about her life. What started as coffee dates became secret lunch meetings. Michael would take her to expensive restaurants where one meal cost more than Rebecca spent on food for a whole week. He would order wine that cost hundreds of dollars and act like it was normal. During these lunches, Michael would hold Rebecca's hand across the table. He would tell her she was beautiful and special. He said she deserved to live a better life. Michael made Rebecca feel like she was the most important person in the world. No one had ever made her feel this way before. After 2 months of secret meetings, Michael kissed Rebecca in his car outside the restaurant. She knew it was wrong because she was married to David. But being with Michael felt like a dream. He was gentle and romantic in ways David had never been. Rebecca felt alive, for the first time in years. Michael started renting hotel rooms where he and Rebecca could meet in private. These were not cheap hotels. They were fancy places with soft beds and beautiful views. Michael would order room service that cost more than David made in a day. They would drink champagne and talk about their dreams. Rebecca began living 2 completely different lives. During the day, she would be with Michael in his world of luxury and excitement. At night, she would go home to David in their small house. The difference between these 2 worlds made Rebecca feel sick inside. David noticed that Rebecca seemed different. She was quieter at dinner. She spent more time on her phone. She seemed distracted when he talked to her. When David asked if something was wrong, Rebecca would smile and say everything was fine. But David could tell she was lying. Rebecca started hating her life with David even more. Their house felt like a prison. Their furniture looked old and ugly. David's work clothes smelled bad. Even the way David ate his food annoyed Rebecca. She felt angry all the time but tried to hide it. Michael bought Rebecca expensive gifts that she had to hide from David. There was a gold bracelet that cost $5,000. Rebecca told David it was fake jewelry from work. There were silk dresses that cost more than David's truck payment. Rebecca said they were samples from the store that she got for free. One evening, Michael took Rebecca to his penthouse apartment. It was on the top floor of the tallest building in the city. The apartment had huge windows that showed the whole city. The furniture was white leather and looked like it came from a magazine. The kitchen had marble counters and appliances that Rebecca had only seen in movies. Michael showed Rebecca his bedroom. The bed was bigger than Rebecca's entire bedroom at home. There were paintings on the walls that Michael said were worth more than most people made in their lifetime. The bathroom had a bathtub made of marble and gold faucets. That night, Rebecca and Michael became lovers. Afterwards, they lay in his expensive bed and talked about the future. Michael said he wanted to find someone who could share his lifestyle. He said he needed a woman who understood luxury and could fit into his world. Rebecca asked Michael what he meant. Michael explained that he traveled to important business meetings. He went to parties with powerful people. He needed someone who could talk to these people and make a good impression. He said his last girlfriend had not been able to handle his lifestyle. Michael told Rebecca she was different. He said she was smart and beautiful enough to be part of his world. But there was one problem: Rebecca was married. Michael said he could never have a serious relationship with a married woman. It would be too complicated and messy. Rebecca felt her heart sink. She asked Michael what that meant for them. Michael said he cared about her very much. But if she wanted a future with him, she would need to be free from her marriage. He said he understood it was difficult, but that was just how things had to be. That night, Rebecca went home to David feeling confused and desperate. She looked at their small house and felt trapped. She looked at David sleeping peacefully and felt angry. He was standing between her and the life she wanted. For the first time, Rebecca wished David was not in her life at all. Rebecca started thinking about divorce, but when she looked into it, she realized she would get very little money. David did not own much. Their house still had a big mortgage. David's truck was old and not worth much. If Rebecca divorced David, she would be poor and alone. Rebecca knew that Michael would never want to be with a woman who had no money. He was used to dating women who came from wealthy families. If Rebecca showed up, divorced and broke, Michael would probably lose interest in her quickly. But then Rebecca remembered something important. David had life insurance through his job. If something happened to David, Rebecca would get $300,000. It was not millions like Michael had, but it would be enough money to start fresh. It would be enough to show Michael that she was serious about their relationship. Rebecca started having terrible thoughts about David. She would imagine what would happen if David had an accident at work. Construction work was dangerous. People got hurt all the time. If David had an accident, no one would think it was strange. Rebecca would be a young widow with insurance money. Michael might see her as someone worth being with. These thoughts scared Rebecca at first. She tried to push them away and focus on other things, but the thoughts kept coming back. Every time she was with Michael in his beautiful world, she would think about how different her life could be if David was not around. Rebecca started paying attention to David's work schedule. She learned about the construction sites where he worked. She asked him questions about the dangerous equipment he used. David thought Rebecca was just being interested in his job. He was happy that his wife finally wanted to know about his work. Rebecca also started researching David's life insurance policy. She called the insurance company and asked questions about how the money would be paid. She learned that if David died in an accident, she would get the full amount within 30 days. No one would question it if David died at work. Rebecca knew these thoughts were wrong, but every day they became stronger. She felt like David was keeping her from her real life with Michael. She began to think that maybe David's death would not be such a terrible thing after all. Rebecca spent weeks planning what she would do. She watched David's work schedule very carefully. She learned that on Friday nights, David often worked late at construction sites. He would stay after the other workers went home to finish important jobs. This gave Rebecca an idea for her terrible plan. Rebecca started collecting sleeping pills. She told her doctor that she could not sleep at night. The doctor gave her strong medicine that would make people very drowsy. Rebecca did not take the pills herself. Instead, she saved them up over several weeks. She had enough pills to make someone fall asleep for many hours. David was building a new house in a quiet part of town. The construction site was far from other buildings. At night, no one was around to see what happened there. Rebecca drove by the site several times to learn where everything was located. She saw that there was a deep hole where the basement would be built. On October 15th, Rebecca decided it was time to act. That morning, she kissed David goodbye like always. She made his lunch and put it in the blue cooler. David told her he would be working late that night. He said he wanted to finish pouring concrete before the weekend. Rebecca said she understood and would keep dinner warm for him. During the day, Rebecca could barely concentrate on work. She felt nervous and scared, but also excited. She kept thinking about her new life with Michael. She imagined living in his penthouse apartment and traveling around the world. These dreams helped her feel brave about what she was planning to do. After work, Rebecca went home and made David's favorite dinner. She cooked pot roast with potatoes and carrots. She also made fresh coffee and put it in a thermos bottle. But this coffee was different. Rebecca crushed up all the sleeping pills she had been saving. She mixed the powder into the hot coffee until it dissolved completely. Rebecca drove to the construction site around 7:30 in the evening. She could see lights on and heard the sound of machines working. David's truck was parked near the entrance. Rebecca parked her car and carried the dinner and coffee toward the work area. David was surprised and happy to see Rebecca. She never visited him at work sites. He thought it was sweet that she had brought him dinner. David was dirty and tired from working all day. He was grateful for the break and the hot meal. Rebecca and David sat in his truck to eat dinner. Rebecca watched carefully as David drank the coffee. She had put a lot of sleeping medicine in it. The coffee tasted a little bitter, but David did not seem to notice. He was hungry and tired from working. Within 20 minutes, David started to feel strange. He said he felt dizzy and very sleepy. Rebecca told him he had been working too hard. She said the fresh air might help him feel better. She helped David get out of the truck and walk toward the construction area. David was having trouble walking straight. The sleeping medicine was making him confused and weak. Rebecca guided him toward the deep hole where the basement would be. David trusted Rebecca completely. He thought she was trying to help him feel better. When they reached the edge of the hole, Rebecca told David to be careful. The hole was about 12 feet deep with concrete blocks stacked around the edges. David was so sleepy from the medicine that he could barely stand up. Rebecca knew this was her chance. Rebecca pushed David as hard as she could. He was too weak from the sleeping pills to catch himself. David fell into the deep hole and hit the bottom hard. Rebecca could hear him, groaning in pain. He was hurt badly but still alive. Rebecca knew she had to finish what she started. She used a machine at the construction site to push heavy concrete blocks into the hole. The blocks were very heavy and fell on top of David. Rebecca pushed more and more blocks until she was sure David could not survive. After David stopped making any sounds, Rebecca climbed down into the hole to check. David was dead, crushed under the heavy concrete blocks. Rebecca felt sick to her stomach but also relieved. Her biggest problem was finally solved. Rebecca had to make the scene look like an accident. She used the machine to position the concrete blocks so they looked like they had fallen naturally. She made sure there were no footprints or other signs that someone else had been there. Rebecca took the thermos with the drugged coffee back to her car. She also took the dinner containers. She drove home and washed everything carefully. She threw away the thermos and the leftover sleeping pills. She wanted to destroy any evidence of her crime. That night, Rebecca took a long shower and went to bed. She tried to act normal, but her hands were shaking. She kept thinking about David lying under those concrete blocks. She felt scared about what she had done, but also excited about her future with Michael. Rebecca did not sleep much that night. She kept hearing sounds and thinking someone was coming to arrest her, but no one came. Rebecca's plan had worked. David was dead, and it looked like an accident. Soon she would collect the insurance money and start her new life with Michael. The next morning, Rebecca got dressed and went to work like nothing had happened. She acted surprised when the police called to tell her about David's accident. She cried and screamed just like a real widow would do. No one suspected that Rebecca had murdered her own husband. Rebecca thought she had committed the perfect crime. She believed she would soon be rich and free to marry Michael Thompson. But Rebecca had made several mistakes that would soon lead the police right to her door. Her dream of a perfect new life was about to become her worst nightmare. The next morning, David's construction crew arrived at the work site at 7 o'clock. The foreman, a man named Robert Johnson, was the first to see something was wrong. David's truck was still parked near the site, but David was nowhere to be found. This was very unusual because David was always the first worker to arrive each morning. Robert walked around the construction site looking for David. When he got to the basement area, he saw concrete blocks scattered in the deep hole. At first, Robert thought the blocks had fallen during the night, but then he saw David's work boots sticking out from under the concrete. Robert immediately called for help. The other workers came running and they all worked together to move the heavy blocks. When they uncovered David's body, everyone could see that he was dead. Robert called the police right away. Within 15 minutes, police cars and ambulances filled the construction site. Detective Lisa Martinez was assigned to investigate David's death. She was an experienced detective who had worked on many cases involving workplace accidents. Detective Martinez was known for being very careful and thorough in her investigations. She never assumed anything was simple until she had checked all the facts. When Detective Martinez arrived at the scene, she talked to Robert and the other workers. They all said the same thing. David was very careful about safety. He never took risks that could get him hurt. David had been working construction for 15 years without any serious accidents. Robert told Detective Martinez that David would never work alone near an unstable pile of concrete blocks. David always made sure the work area was safe before doing anything dangerous. The other workers agreed that David was the most safety-conscious person on the crew. Detective Martinez looked at the scene very carefully. She noticed that the concrete blocks were scattered in a strange way. If they had fallen naturally, they would be in different positions. Also, the ground around the hole did not show signs of the blocks falling by accident. Detective Martinez decided she needed to talk to David's wife. She drove to the house on Maple Street where Rebecca was waiting. Rebecca was dressed in black, and her eyes were red from crying. She looked like a woman who had lost the most important person in her life. Rebecca told Detective Martinez that she had been home all evening watching television. She said David had called her around 6 o'clock to say he would be working late. Rebecca said she went to bed early and did not know anything was wrong until the police called her. Detective Martinez asked Rebecca about David's work habits. Rebecca said David was always very careful at work. She said he often talked about safety rules and how important it was to avoid accidents. This matched what the construction workers had told the detective. Something about Rebecca's story bothered Detective Martinez, but she could not figure out what it was. Rebecca seemed genuinely sad about David's death. She answered all the questions, without hesitation. But the detective had learned to trust her instincts when something felt wrong. Detective Martinez decided to check security cameras in the area around the construction site. There were not many cameras because it was a quiet part of town, but she found one camera at a gas station about 2 blocks away. The camera showed the road that led to the construction site. When Detective Martinez looked at the camera footage, from the night David died, she saw something interesting. David's truck had driven past the camera at 5:30, heading toward the construction site. This matched Rebecca's story about David going to work. But then Detective Martinez saw something that made her very suspicious. At 7:45, that night, she saw Rebecca's car driving away from the construction site. This was almost 2 hours after Rebecca said David had called her. If Rebecca was home watching television, why was her car near the construction site? Detective Martinez drove back to Rebecca's house and asked her about the security camera footage. Rebecca looked surprised and nervous. She said she had forgotten about driving to the construction site. She said she had brought David dinner, but found the site empty and dark. She said she assumed David had already gone home. This explanation did not make sense to Detective Martinez. If Rebecca had gone to the construction site looking for David, why did she not mention it the first time? They talked? And if the site was empty and dark, why did she not call David to ask where he was? Detective Martinez decided to investigate Rebecca more carefully. She asked other detectives to help her look into Rebecca's life. They checked her phone records, her bank accounts, and her work schedule. They also talked to people who knew Rebecca and David. The first thing the detectives discovered was that Rebecca had been receiving expensive gifts from someone. Her bank account showed deposits of cash that she could not have earned from her job at the jewelry store. When they asked Rebecca about the money, she said she had been saving tips from customers. But the jewelry store manager told the detectives that customers rarely gave tips to employees. The manager also said that Rebecca had been acting differently in recent months. She seemed distracted at work and spent a lot of time on her phone talking to someone. Detective Martinez also found Rebecca's phone records very interesting. Rebecca had been making many calls and sending text messages to a number that belonged to Michael Thompson. Some of the text messages were sent late at night when Rebecca should have been home with David. When Detective Martinez looked into Michael Thompson, she learned that he was a very wealthy man. She also learned that he had been divorced for several years and was known for dating different women. Detective Martinez decided she needed to talk to Michael about his relationship with Rebecca. Michael Thompson seemed nervous when Detective Martinez came to his office. At first, he said he barely knew Rebecca. He said she was just a woman who worked at a jewelry store where he sometimes shopped. But when Detective Martinez showed him the phone records, Michael admitted that he had been having an affair with Rebecca. Michael told Detective Martinez that Rebecca had been unhappy in her marriage. He said Rebecca often complained about her husband and wished she could have a different life. Michael said Rebecca had asked him many questions about what kind of woman he would want to marry. The most important thing Michael told Detective Martinez was about a conversation he had with Rebecca just 1 week before David died. Rebecca had asked Michael what would happen if she was suddenly single and had some money to start a new life. Michael said he told Rebecca that he could only have a serious relationship with a woman who was free to be with him. Detective Martinez now had a clear motive for murder. Rebecca had been having an affair with a rich man who wanted her to be single. Rebecca also had financial reasons to want David dead because of his life insurance policy. Detective Martinez was sure that Rebecca had killed her husband, but she still needed more evidence to prove it. Detective Martinez knew she needed more evidence before she could arrest Rebecca. She decided to have David's body examined by a medical expert. The doctor who examined David found something very important. David had large amounts of sleeping medicine in his blood. This was strange because David had never been prescribed sleeping pills. The doctor told Detective Martinez that David had enough sleeping medicine in his system to make him very drowsy and confused. The amount was not enough to kill him, but it would have made it impossible for him to protect himself if he fell. This proved that someone had given David the sleeping medicine on purpose. Detective Martinez went back to talk to Rebecca again. This time she asked Rebecca directly about sleeping pills. Rebecca said she had been having trouble sleeping and had gotten medicine from her doctor. When Detective Martinez checked with the doctor, she learned that Rebecca had been getting sleeping pills for 2 months, but had not been taking them herself. Detective Martinez also found other evidence that proved Rebecca was lying. Rebecca's computer showed that she had been looking up information about David's life insurance policy. She had also been reading about workplace accidents and how they were investigated by police. The most damaging evidence came from Rebecca's cell phone. Detective Martinez found text messages between Rebecca and Michael that showed they had been planning a future together. In one message, Rebecca wrote that she wished she could be free to start over with Michael. In another message, she asked Michael if he would still want to be with her if she had some money but was not rich. Detective Martinez arrested Rebecca Williams for the murder of her husband, David. Rebecca cried and said she was innocent. She claimed that David's death was a terrible accident, but the evidence against her was very strong. The trial began 6 months later. The prosecutor was a man named James Parker who had won many murder cases. Rebecca's lawyer was named Susan Collins. She tried to argue that all the evidence against Rebecca was just coincidence, and that David had really died in an accident. The prosecutor presented the case step by step. He showed the jury that Rebecca had motive, means, and opportunity to kill David. The motive was her affair with Michael Thompson and her desire for David's life insurance money. The means was the sleeping pills she had been collecting. The opportunity was the night she visited David at the construction site. Michael Thompson was called to testify at the trial. He looked uncomfortable as he told the jury about his relationship with Rebecca. Michael admitted that he had told Rebecca he could only be serious with a woman who was single and financially independent. He said Rebecca had become obsessed with the idea of being free from her marriage. Michael also testified that Rebecca had often talked about how much she hated her life with David. She had told Michael that David was holding her back from the life she deserved. Michael said he never thought Rebecca would actually hurt David, but looking back he realized she had been planning something terrible. The medical expert testified about the sleeping pills found in David's blood. He explained to the jury that David would have been very drowsy and unable to protect himself. The expert said it was impossible for David to have taken so much sleeping medicine by accident. Rebecca's doctor also testified. She told the jury that Rebecca had been asking for sleeping pills for months, but had never complained about being tired during the day. This suggested that Rebecca was not actually taking the pills herself, but was saving them for some other purpose. Detective Martinez testified about all the evidence she had found. She explained how Rebecca had lied about being at the construction site. She showed the jury Rebecca's phone records and computer searches. She described how Rebecca had been living a double life with Michael Thompson. The most powerful testimony came from David's co-workers. They told the jury that David was the most safety-conscious person they knew. They said David would never work alone near unstable concrete blocks. They explained that David had 15 years of experience and had never had a serious accident before. Rebecca's lawyer tried to create doubt about the evidence. She argued that the sleeping pills could have been in medicine David was taking for pain. She suggested that Rebecca's affair with Michael did not prove she was a murderer. She said the evidence was not strong enough to prove Rebecca was guilty beyond reasonable doubt. But the prosecutor had done his job well. He had shown the jury a clear picture of what had happened. Rebecca Williams had been living a secret life with Michael Thompson. She had become desperate to escape her marriage and start a new life. When Michael told her he could only be with a single woman, Rebecca decided to murder her husband. The prosecutor also showed that Rebecca had carefully planned the murder. She had collected sleeping pills over many weeks. She had learned David's work schedule and chosen the perfect night to act. She had drugged David's coffee and pushed him into the deep hole. Then she had used heavy machinery to drop concrete blocks on him. After the prosecution and defense had finished presenting their cases, the jury went away to make their decision. They talked about the evidence for 3 days. Some jurors thought Rebecca might be innocent, but most of them believed she was guilty of murder. When the jury came back, the foreman stood up and read their decision. They found Rebecca Williams guilty of first-degree murder. Rebecca started crying and her lawyer put her arm around her. David's family, who had been sitting in the courtroom every day, finally felt that justice had been done. The judge sentenced Rebecca to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. She would spend the rest of her life behind bars for murdering the man who had loved her more than anything in the world. Rebecca's dreams of wealth and luxury had become a nightmare that would never end. Michael Thompson ended his relationship with Rebecca immediately after her arrest. He testified against her at the trial and then moved to another state to start over. He never spoke about Rebecca again and eventually married a woman from a wealthy family. Rebecca Williams became known as one of the most cold-blooded murderers in the state's history. She had killed a good man who had never done anything wrong, except love her. Her greed and selfishness had destroyed 2 lives and left David's family heartbroken forever. The woman who had wanted everything ended up with nothing except the knowledge that she would spend the rest of her life paying for her terrible crime.